Welcome to this edition of In-Depth Alaska. I'm Tracy Sinclair. The Anchorage School District is trying to close a $100 million budget gap. Reporter Joe Allgood sat down with Anchorage School District Superintendent Jharrett Bryantt to discuss that topic and others. Here's the extended version of that conversation.
Before we dive into the budget, I want to ask about the statement you released earlier this week about immigration forces and ASD schools or not letting them enter without a warrant. You sent that out earlier this week and said that ASD is assessing just some of the legal, with legal counsel if there is any warrants. What is that analysis sort of looking like as the week has gone on?
Sure. So for the past couple of weeks, we've been in conversations with a lot of individuals, including attorneys. I myself have engaged with superintendents across the nation because what we're discussing is really impacting every community in the country. And the culmination of that analysis resulted in the letter that I submitted on Monday to the public, which is essentially the fact that ASD is fully committed to ensuring that students know their rights. And students have special legal considerations in particular. And my letter simply underscored the fact that the Supreme Court ruled 40 years ago that every student has the right to a fair and free public education. That's not a change. And students' data is between the student and whoever their parent would like to release that data to. That is not a change either. So we're proud to make sure that every student knows fully what their special legal considerations are, and we're here to make sure that our schools operate soundly.
All right, thank you. Another thing about that statement, it was released pretty shortly after the FBI announced that the FBI here in Anchorage announced they would be working with the other forces. Was there at all any communication between the school district and the FBI before they made that announcement?
So what I'll say is that we need to be engaged with the law enforcement community, and I personally want to ensure that the FBI and all federal officials know where ASD stance is, and I hope that if there is some reason that a federal official would like to enter our schools, that they contact me first, and we'll make sure that we work through that process.
Okay. So you're saying there wasn't any tip-off beforehand just because it was so close in time? Was that just coincidence?
I didn't have any personal conversations with the FBI.
Okay, thank you. Okay, and then just in general, since Monday, have there been any law enforcement agencies asking to enter any schools?
No, and I want to make sure the community understands that there have been no attempts for federal officials to enter our schools for the purpose of immigration enforcement. This is really just to underscore what's on the community's minds. We had received quite a few calls from parents that are really scared and nervous for various reasons. And I just wanted to assure them that ASD knows what students' rights are, and we're going to make sure that their parents have that information too.
All right, thank you. The big topic, that $100 million deficit, it's sort of been a trend that we've seen in the last couple of years that ASD keeps falling into deficits. Can you speak a bit to why we keep seeing this pattern?
Sure. So I'm going to reference a slide that was shared publicly yesterday at our work session. So since 2017, you'll see that there really hasn't been any political will of the legislature to increase the amount of reliable funding that students receive. We throw around this term base student allocation a lot. I want to make sure the community understands what that means. That's essentially an amount that the legislature determined years ago, many years ago, that this is the per pupil allotment that every student is entitled to, and some students receive more if they receive special services or what have you. But this is the core of the school foundation funding formula for the state of Alaska. The issue is that the impact of inflation has decimated lives, communities, individuals, and school districts are not immune from the impacts of inflation. Think about, as a person, the cost of gas since 2017 has gone up dramatically, hasn't it? Same with groceries. My rent has certainly gone up since 2017, and I think many people listening probably feel the same way. We have custodians, we have bus drivers, we have teachers that are grappling with those realities. So ASD is committed to making sensible, reasonable cost of living adjustments. They're typically between 1% and 3%, but over 10 years, that adds up. And a lack of willingness to solve the root cause, which is a lack of an inflation adjustment for the base student allocation, is hurting not just ASD, but essentially any district that you can name statewide. So while the legislature has been kicking the can, the amount that inflation's impacted the district goes up. So today, that 5960 number, that's the base student allocation, that was worth $4,000 back in 2017. So that's why we're in this situation. And what we're asking for is just a reliable, sensible solution. School districts, I can assure you, are not asking for Ferrari school buses. All we're asking for is to have the ability to plan for our budget in January so we can hire the right number of teachers and nurses and counselors for our kids. But we can't do that, and that's why the situation that we're in is so dire, because ASD is building its budget around that 5960 number. In history, you'll see like the past at least 3 years, the legislature has come through with additional one-time funding. The problem is that we don't know what that number is until many months after our budget is due to the municipality. So this budget reflects an attempt to try to buy ourselves some time, because there is a possibility that there could be a bill that increases levels of education funding. But really, what we're trying to do is preserve as many jobs as possible. That's priority number one. And then number two is to make sure that we maintain our levels of funding for direct instruction and student support services. That's historically been 81% of our budget in the past. That will be the percent in the budget that's being deliberated right now. And in my mind, that's the floor. Certainly, there's an opportunity to increase those levels if we can figure out how to increase funding sustainably.
Yeah, I remember last night the discussion on one-time payments and then also those priorities of the district. So given the trend of budget deficits and the legislation not increasing that since BSA since 2017, there was some language, I think, in the summary sheet that indicated there was hope that Juneau might come through with some additional funding. How much are you hoping for that? And given just the track record, do you really think, is that something at all likely?
It's within the realm of possibility. I know as recently as this week, the governor initiated a meeting with some of the senior lawmakers, and they're trying to figure out a path forward. I think that's a positive sign. There are kind of two options on the table right now. One came from the governor, one came from the House Bill 69, and both attempt to increase levels of funding for schools, but the methods are very different. I believe that sensible funding like House Bill 69 would essentially mean that ASD would be able to more reasonably predict its levels of funding moving forward, because there would be that inflation adjustment factor baked in to this piece of legislation. And that's essentially what districts are asking for. We want to recognize that the cost of living goes up and there needs to be wiggle room to retain our educators. My first couple months, we weren't able to keep pace with the amount we were paying our bus drivers, and many of them resigned, and families didn't have transportation services as a result. I don't want that for our families' teachers either, but that's the direction that we're headed if something doesn't give at the state level.
Okay, let's get into some of the cuts. There's several things that are, a lot of things that are named in there, but first off, I want to just ask about some of the sports that are being cut, specifically hockey. Hockey, I think, is, as Alaskans, people maybe that comes to mind as sort of an Alaskan sport, it's cold weather and all that. Why is it included in one of the 3 high school sports that would be cut under this proposal?
Totally. I wish we could offer every single sport that students desired within ASD. And again, if we can figure out this sensible path forward, I think there's a path to do that. The reason why 3 sports in particular were targeted was not because we don't recognize the value that they add to children. They certainly do. It opens up scholarship opportunities. It's just great for students' mental health and well-being. But those happen to be the 3 sports with the highest per pupil expenditures. So this was an attempt to recognize that there are some sports that are unaffordable for districts given the current state of funding, but I also want to ensure that we could have funds available for the other sports that are also leveraged by hundreds of students. I realize that no one would want a high school without any sports whatsoever, and this budget recognizes that fact, but we do have to grapple with this reality that there's been a lack of political will to increase funding, and unfortunately, those sports that have the highest cost per student are the ones that we target, just because we're trying to ensure we can offer sports to as many students as possible.
Thank you. All right, finally, a lot of the cuts are attrition based, reducing some of the staffing requirements. I wanted to ask, we've heard reports that you received a raise last year, somewhere around $30,000. Can you confirm that? And if so, why are there so many FTEs reduced rather than maybe, I think someone at the meeting last night asked why you aren't starting from the top?
I don't mean to embarrass you, but I think you're confusing me with the governor. It was actually the governor that received tens of thousands of dollars beyond what he was receiving. I've actually received a 0% raise. I fully accepted the terms of my contract, and there hasn't been any changes. The only thing that the school boards approved are extensions to my contract, so additional years of time, no actual additional compensation. But if we want to talk about inflation adjustments, let's talk about the fact that amongst all state agencies, you'll notice that there's been a 29% inflation adjustment for all of the state agencies, including the governor's office, which looks like it got a 34% increase since 2017. In fact, it looks like every single state agency has gotten an increase in funding except for K-12 school districts. Even the Department of Education, it seems, got a 24% bump since 2017. It's very curious that the prisons got a 52% increase and school districts are minus 5.8. That's a great question you should look into. I would also offer this quote when we talk about compensation of elected officials. So here's a quote that was in Alaska Public Media from Larry Ledoux, and it reads, if we're really going to have a system where anybody can run for office and be financially able to do it, we have to have salaries that are commensurate to that need. That's from one of the members of the state commission that regulates legislature and governor's salaries. So if we had people half as passionate as Larry is about raising teacher salaries as they are about raising the salaries of elected officials, I guarantee you we'd have the premier schools in the entire nation, if not the world. So let's hope for people like Larry who care about teachers.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thanks. I appreciate your time and taking the time to go through that.
Yeah, great questions.
Thank you to Superintendent Bryantt for sitting down with us, and thank you for listening to In Depth Alaska. Please like and subscribe to this podcast.